Welcome to this new episode of Ask Stago, the podcast dedicated to provide expert answers to your expert questions in hemostasis. I'm Lisa Gannon and I'm really glad to be the host of this new episode. I'm also delighted to welcome my co-host as usual, Anne-Cécile Ortega, Product Line Manager for Stago Lab Automation Solutions.
Hello Lisa. Hello everyone listening.
So, Anne-Cécile, today it's our fourth episode of season 5.
Yes, and for today's subject, we are going to take an in-depth focus on MyOptiLab, the Stago workflow audit service for laboratories.
So, Anne-Cécile, you're a product line manager in Stago Lab Automation Solutions team. So you're clearly really well positioned to talk about that for us today.
Yes, that's right.
So, what challenges are clinical laboratories facing today?
Clinical laboratories are turning into production facilities that need to do more with less. And this applies to both private and public labs. Less money. Labs need to control expenses, so they operate with fewer staff. Less problems. They aim to improve productivity with solutions that are reliable and don't fail. Less expertise. Staff are becoming more like engineers, managing complex machines and IT systems rather than specializing in a single area. So they often handle multiple workstations.
So if we take a timeline, say the 1960s, how would you say the clinical laboratory has evolved since then to now?
There's been a significant evolution in clinical laboratories from the 60s to today. As the volume of patient samples has increased, the first efficiency improvements began in the early 80s with the introduction of automation and batch processing. The second major advancements came in the early 90s when diagnostic lab equipment started operating in random access mode, and this allowed for more flexible testing. And there was a third wave of improvement around the year 2000 with the widespread adoption of total lab automation and the integration of work cells. And that includes the tube transportation, the pre-analytical, the analytical, and the post-analytical phases. Currently, adding more machine is no longer increasing productivity. We've reached a point where further productivity improvements are not possible with additional equipment alone. In fact, increasing the number of systems does not lead to better productivity, and it makes it necessary to focus on improving the efficiency instead.
And I don't know, do you have in mind what are the kind of tools that the lab could employ to improve efficiency?
Well, there is a very known tool, and that's the Lean Six Sigma methodology, and it can significantly enhance lab efficiency by reducing the waste and minimizing the errors. In a clinical laboratory, this means streamlining processes, eliminating unnecessary steps, and ensuring that each step adds value. And by focusing on data-driven decision-making, the Lean Six Sigma helps identify bottlenecks and standardize procedures and optimize the use of the resources. And as a result, there's faster turnaround time, improved quality of the test results, lowering the operating cost, and maintaining high standard for patient care.
So is that exactly what we call the MyOptiLab audit, which is provided by Stago?
Yes, exactly. The MyOptiLab workflow analysis is specifically a service offered by Stago. It might be described as a real-time observation of the processes in place in the lab. It's like a picture of the current process where we're going to map all the laboratory's activity. In this analysis, we try to identify things that could be causing inefficiencies and what are the areas for improvement. The MyOptiLab carries out a complete analysis designed specifically for clinical pathology labs, and it uses the Lean Six Sigma methods, which applies widely in the industry and that provides solutions for increasing productivity and improving, at the end, the patient quality of service.
So mapping a laboratory activity from end to end must take an awful lot of time.
Yeah, it's quite a lot of time. Can go usually from 2 to 5 days. That's for the big organizations. And it would involve a complete study from the arrival of the sample tube and to the delivery of the results.
So take us through the process. What would be the first step of a typical MyOptiLab workflow study?
On first phase, we set objectives together with the laboratory because it's important to understand the laboratory's expectations and the current challenges. And this allows to involve the team in the process and defining the objectives to be achieved. And then on the second phase, we observe and we measure and describe the lab activity. We have some MyOptiLab specialists, and they can perform the timing of each sample that arrive at a laboratory with all the successive steps. And this would include pre-analytical, analytical validation up to the delivery of the validated results. And we also include the timing of the consumables preparation and loading and the quality control processes, the internal and external QC. And it is during that preparation phase that we would look at things that could be improved and guided by a lean tool that is called the 7 Wastes.
Yeah, so the 7 Waste tool, this is a concept that would be familiar to a lot of our listeners. This is the idea of eliminating waste. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So the waste we will look at on the MyOptiLab audit, those are the waste in transportations, so that all the movements of the people, of tools, inventory, equipment, or product further than necessary, or having more inventory than necessary, the unnecessary movement of people, of equipment, the waste of waiting, that includes people waiting and idle equipment, the overproduction, this is providing more information than needed or producing more than demanding, or overprocessing, that's doing more work or having more steps than what is required, or using equipment with a capacity that are beyond what is required, and the defects. So MyOptiLab workflow audit that starts by carefully examining the existing processes. And then we record the steps and we measure the key performance indicator. And finally, we can provide a clear description and explanation of the current state to identify the areas for improvement. So the last will be to implement the improvement action and also follow the analysis through KPIs that will monitor efficacy.
So during this process, what is typically expected from the staff in the laboratory? Do they have a particular role to play?
Yeah, absolutely. Their engagement is very important so that the outcome, the suggestions for improvement, that they can be implemented. The change management is really a key element for success.
Yeah. So to conclude, Anne-Cécile, so could you tell us why conducting a MyOptiLab audit is beneficial for improving the efficiency of a clinical laboratory?
Conducting a MyOptiLab audit is really a valuable approach for enhancing the efficiency of a clinical lab. It would provide a structured framework to identify the waste, reduce the variability, and optimize the processes. And by systematically analyzing the workflows and performance metrics, the audit help uncover areas that need improvement and implement the data-driven solution. And this leads not only to faster turnaround time and higher quality results, but also reduce costs, and that maximize the resource utilization. So ultimately, MyOptiLab audit ensures that the laboratory operates at its full potential while maintaining the highest standard of patient care.
So thank you so much, Anne-Cécile, for joining me for this podcast. Instead of being a host, as being a key contributor, and also for this conclusion. And indeed, thank you all for listening too. As usual, all literature sources and links to previous podcasts are listed in the podcast description box. And please feel free to list or send us any questions that you may have at our email address, ask@stago.com. We'll be really happy to address any questions in our following episodes. See you next time.
This podcast is brought to you by Stago. Diagnostics is in our blood.